Hello and welcome to our next session, Bank Security in the Digital Era, addressing the new challenges post-COVID-19. I'm delighted to welcome our two speakers, Evgenia Ostrovskaya from Genetec and Simon Cook from QCIC. Genetec is an industry leader in IP-based security solutions, and QCIC is a global security consultancy designing holistic security solutions. I'm going to hand straight over to Eve, who will facilitate the conversation with Simon. Over to you, Eve.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here. Always happy to be with RBR. This November, we had a webinar about branch transformation with RBR as well, and how COVID has accelerated it. That made us think what would be the best way to move forward for a security team leader? What should be the choice of infrastructure? Who should lead the generation of requirements for security systems? Should IT be involved? Should operational department, marketing department be involved? Many more questions. I hope that today we will be able to cover some of this. So for the start, I would like to ask Simon, may I ask you to summarize some of your thoughts and outcomes of the webinar and give us your perspective on where should we start when we think of future infrastructure for security solutions?
Certainly, thanks, Eve. So in the session in November, we actually touched on some of the changes in digital behaviour that have occurred during the COVID situation, and certainly how these changes will continue and change the way that the branch and bank operate post-pandemic. Ultimately, this leads to banks really to push to actually realise the branch transformation now, rather than thinking about it as a nice to have in the future or something that needs to be done at some point in the future. Based on the Accenture research, we looked at 3 clear roles that were identified for branches moving forwards. So the first is the problem solver. And this is really the day-to-day transactional type activities. So it's ATM issues, it's money gone missing issues, it's challenges around credit cards or potential fraud or things like that. The second is really where banks can come into their own, and that's the digital ambassador. Now, the digital ambassador is really where you can actually help your clients get online and get comfortable online, not just with the banking app or the banking website, but actually more around just being online, the online presence, security, and sort of online behavior that will actually give the customer that level of comfort when it comes to money. And thirdly, it's the trusted advisor. This is the role around the long-term decisions. So we looked at a number of statistics and facts, but one of the key ones was ultimately 40% of people don't trust banks without a branch network. So there is still that drive for that human interaction. And this is really where those life-changing decisions, the mortgages, the ISAs, the students, loans, etc., come into play. But ultimately, all of this leads to a change in behavior and a change in moving from that kind of bureaucratic sort of mindset or the traditional service approach to more non-traditional services and more that kind of how the customer feels and ultimately that customer experience. Now, one of the things we looked at, obviously, moving forward from this and into the branch transformation was how technology can actually help in this journey. Now, we looked at how the security platform is moving from from just doing security to actually more of a business tool to help banks understand their customer behavior patterns. Now, as we grow, we add more and more devices, more and more applications. And here, for example, you see a connected branch or an example of a connected branch. Lots of different devices connected, lots of different applications connected. This is the future. We talk about IoT, the Internet of Things, and the growth of connecting applications. But if we look at one particular one here in the COVID situation, we can consider analytics. And here we're looking at occupancy. Now, when we talk about that sort of comfort and experience for the customer, here we really look at, in today's society, social distancing. Now, with the pandemic the way it is, social distancing and that sort of feeling of safety and security is really important and part of that experience. So analytics can actually help us in that, looking at the occupancy levels in the bank, looking at where people are, the distances between people, all of this actually, helping change the process and change the way the bank is working. And then moving forward, post-pandemic, we actually look at other applications for video analytics, heat mapping. If we have that digital area in the bank for the digital ambassadors, then we can see how that's been utilized and so forth with these types of analytics. But really, the key here, if you see on the top there, it's the cloud. the fundamental to any branch transformation really for us moving forwards is the cloud, building that infrastructure on the cloud. Now, you may already, as a bank or as an organization, be actually looking at the cloud for other applications. So, you might have already started this process. But more and more, we're seeing this drive in the physical security arena to actually move to the cloud. And there's many different benefits, much like in the IT space, for moving to a cloud infrastructure. But the three key ones that we see really, firstly is agility. Now, as we're evolving and changing, and certainly with COVID, we have to deploy quickly. So agility really is the very nature of the cloud. We can deploy solutions out with ease. We can actually get them to be less intensive when it comes to staffing. So actually moving from staff in the branch, out of the branch, having people better focused. But we can change up and down in terms of scale as well. So really the agility to actually deploy a solution is far greater. Second, when we look at actually connecting all these devices, connecting all these applications that I mentioned in the last connected branch example, we consider future-proof. Now, most companies, organizations these days have a cloud-first approach. And here is really where we look at the future-proofing method in terms of how we can actually realize some of this connected branch experience quicker. So, as the customer behavior evolves, as the customer experience changes, we can actually protect the branch with a level of future-proof ability. So then the third one is lower upfront costs. So here we look at, for example, the solution being deployed. When we consider the upfront costs, the cost of server hardware, for example, the infrastructure cost to support those solutions that are going into place. So all of that is removed with the cloud. Not just the upfront costs, but also the ongoing costs that it takes to support those solutions. So, for example, on-site IT staff, ongoing SMAs or support maintenance agreements. Also, soft costs like cooling, like power, like space. I mean, space in a branch now is becoming more of a commodity. So obviously, we still need space for these devices. All of that is removed with the cloud. So, Eve, I think from a Genetec perspective, can you take us through what this might look like from a costing?
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Simon. I'd like to give you an example based on scenario of 100 sites, 4 cameras per site, 100 sites for the sake of calculation. 4 cameras per site, it's averagely small branch, and I think branches will go smaller as we need to be more in the locations with the higher footfall, and normally it's smaller but more effective branches. And let's say 30 days of recording. So the figures which you're seeing, they do not include cost of cameras and networking equipment, simply because they're equivalent across the scenarios. When we think about the one investment, it would indicate that what the bank has to spend or when the contract is signed with the cloud solution based on the charge of the first months of service plus initial setup labor costs. What we can see is this initial day one investment cost is significantly lower with the cloud-based offering. And that allows banks to make parallel investments, staff, marketing, operations, and free up much needed capital. If that goes as the part of the larger cloud-first strategy, and let's say we also can think of the investment from system integrator and distributor in the cloud offering with cameras and networking equipment, that can get the savings even more significant. So to make the first step, understanding your initial cost linked to managing these on-prem devices is a key to create the clear understanding of a return on investment calculator. You need to sit down with IT, you need to sit down with marketing, you also need to sit down with operational department to understand those cross-organizational applications, which will allow to actually create a bigger budget for a higher return on investment. So, but before even thinking about the cloud, we need to actually consider basics. And the first basic is cybersecurity. I want to spin the conversation to that direction a little bit. Till now, I often hear from even from banking customers, that our security network is isolated. We don't have a big threat from cybersecurity perspective. There's IT department who are responsible for that. It's completely independent task. But reality is that even before pandemic, we had every 39 seconds occurring a cyber attack. When pandemic hit us, that would mean that a lot more people are working from home. Organizations are doing their best to support the migration. That also means that the customer data is distributed more broadly than ever been in the past. So, for example, the number of devices exposing remote accessibility to the internet has increased by 42% over the only past months. This is for allowing users to remotely manage their workstations and servers. And remote desktop protocol has a history of security issues and generally shouldn't be publicly accessible without any additional protection, like firewall, like two-factor authentication. But then we can combine it with the spike of cyber threats, such as targeted phishing attempts using the coronavirus to exploit the fear induced by the situation. And you've got a pretty much alarming situation already. And let's put a more general level, and we see the increase of 4,000% in ransomware and malicious attacks through emails. On average, ransom payment in the second quarter of 2020 was about 60% higher compared to the previous quarter, and that's around £200,000. And while there is a common misconception that only certain sized businesses or industries are attacked, the reality is nobody is immune. And threat actors target businesses of all sizes and across all industries. But what does it mean for security or physical security solutions specifically? A problem that persists in the industry is the mindset of set it and forget it. System integrator comes into the picture, they install, they're gone, or even transfer the maintenance to another system integrator. IT department has hardly touched it, and so on. And the fact is that a single unsecure device could be enough to give the foothold necessary for an attacker to put an entire organization's security and people's privacy at risk. So all it takes could be one camera with obsolete firmware or just simple default password, and you will be surprised how many default passwords are out there to create an opening which allow attacker to compromise the network. We conducted Genetec research and of usage of the firmware in the field, which are not up to date. And we found out that 68.4, which is almost 7 out of 10 cameras, are currently running out of date firmware. And then we started to look what type of firmwares are there. So 54% of those firmwares actually contain a known vulnerability. And that brings us to a scary number that almost 4 out of 10 cameras are vulnerable to a cyber attack today. And this is simply not acceptable. The main message is, which I would like to deliver, that cybersecurity is something which is basic. It needs to be cross-organizational. It cannot be a silo feature. And that the cybersecurity is not a feature, it's actually a process. So let me share with you how Genetec approaches it. Step number 1 is risk identification and mitigation. We have a separate team, which is proactively monitoring the emergence of new threats and their potential impact on operators, data safety, and people's lives. We also keep you informed on new risk, provide guidance on best response, and help you build comprehensive security strategy. If you want to know more about it, please check out our website, trust.genetec.com, and you will find a lot of good information, even if you don't use Genetec solutions. That leads us to the step 2, it's solutions you can rely on. our strategy, that the system needs to be designed and software needs to be developed with the several layers of security and employing advanced authentication encryption technology. So it's really in our blood and in our veins to design and build up software with thinking about security, cybersecurity, and privacy. Then we go to step number 3. And I think, in my opinion, this is one of the most important steps, maybe even more important than number 1 and number 2, is the network of trust. As Genetec is, I normally call it IoT platform for security. So we are the basis where we want to plug in as much information as possible from different technology partners and players on the market. We need to know what is their idea of cybersecurity and privacy. And right now, when we speak about third-party integrations, I normally say it's not really third party. It can be fifth party, 10th party, nth party, because we don't know who are they using as the software developer for parts of their software. Who do the OEM, who do they partner with? So by establishing the partnerships, we actually we target to know what our partners are doing in terms of cybersecurity and privacy strategies. And of course, it's all about transparency and openness. We're committed to transparency. We will definitely inform on emergent threats as soon as we identify them. And we always be upfront about their potential impact and available strategies to mitigate and address those vulnerabilities. And to kind of connect it back to Simon's address about the cloud, the more it is in the cloud, the faster these cybersecurity issues can be resolved, and they can be resolved centrally and practically more or less immediate in comparison to distributed on-prem solutions.
So, as Eve mentioned, cybersecurity really not just a feature or a product, it's actually a shared responsibility. It's really trust and a shared mindset between all the parties involved in deploying a solution. So, you know, everyone needs to take that cybersecurity in the physical security place as a high priority. Now, there's obviously 4 key players in this. The first is you guys as end users. The key for you really is to have that relationship and sort of visibility from both an IT and physical security perspective. Second is obviously compliance. You know, compliance is important in everything you do, and it's what you can be assessed on. So obviously making sure that any cybersecurity standards you have follow and link into that. Thirdly, it's obviously running the supply risk assessment. So any new systems or solutions that you are looking at deploying, then you follow those risk assessments to make sure they're delivering a cyber secure application. And then lastly, you need obviously to look at the ongoing penetration testing from that and actually making sure that you're up to date in terms of the penetration testing around those solutions that you deploy. Next, you have the integrator. Now here, whenever you're looking at an integrator, it's making sure that you're selecting an integrator that actually follows a risk assessment based security design. So here, the solution, looking for examples of where that solution is opens up any potential for threat. Obviously then as well, making sure that they're following any compliance rules that you have in place, making sure that they're adhering to your standards. Making sure that they're actually again following manufacturers that are using some of the approaches that you've talked about in the last slide, and of course then when they're deploying and configuring those systems, making sure that they're following manufacturers' best practices. Then you have the manufacturer itself. Eve covered this in really sort of good detail in terms of really having a manufacturer that has a security by design at its very heart, that actually looks at that all the way through the process. So, having secure coding practices, following security lifecycle developments, things like this. And then obviously making sure there is that open disclosure approach. So if they become aware of a vulnerability, not hiding it away, but actually making you aware of it to actually share that information to make sure that you're protected. And then finally, it's us as consultants. Now, we spend a lot of time, obviously, educating on these types of situations, much like we are today. So actually educating our customers, working with our customers to suggest the manufacturers to utilize that have this security by design mindset, that obviously making sure that we're designing systems that actually meet all these standards. And obviously then once these systems are deployed, working with the customers to look at the hardening or the auditing and making sure that they're actually following what was actually designed. So a lot thrown at you in a short space of time. So really there's 3 key takeaways that we want you to leave with today. The first, excuse me, is that physical security is evolving from just actually recording cameras and opening doors. There is a lot more to it than that in today's COVID world and actually the post-pandemic world as we move forward. It's a business tool that can help you understand your customer better and actually give them a better experience in your branches moving forward. The second is that the cloud should be the foremost in your mind of when it comes to infrastructure. So any new systems that you look to deploy should be, if not today, but certainly in the short to mid-term, be able to support a cloud approach to actually build out this holistic business tool that you really want to get to. And finally, cybersecurity is the fundamental basic behind all of this. You know, you've heard a lot today and we'll continue to hear a lot about cybersecurity and the threats around it. Well, it's exactly the same in the physical security space. As this space evolves, again, it becomes another platform for the bad guys to actually potentially exploit. So ultimately, it should be the fundamental basis, whether it's a solution you're deploying, whether it's an integrator you're using, whether it's a consultant you're working with, whether it's a manufacturer's products you're choosing, cybersecurity should be at the basis of all of those decisions. So I'd like to take a thank you for your time on behalf of Eve and myself. And if you have any questions, obviously, please feel free to reach out to us.
Really, thank you, Eve and Simon. What a great conversation, and thank you for the insights. Just before, we do have time for just a couple of questions. But before, I just wanted to go back to what Eve said earlier about the branch transformation webinar we did last month with RBR, Genetec, Access Communications, and QCIC. If you missed that webinar, it's available on the Genetec website. So go and seek it out. Now, as I said, really great insights from both of you guys here. A question for you, Eve. How, looking forward now to past the pandemic, something we all really want to do, how do you think the use of corporate buildings and branches will change after the pandemic, and how can technology help?
And this is a great question, because we have talked a lot about branch transformation, but corporate buildings are going to transform not less. And what we're trying to do is to add the tools which will allow, based also on the security solutions, to understand utilization of the corporate buildings. It can be just simply reporting how many people addressed, and that can be used during pandemic as well, because right now we need to comply with regulations, and we can create the audit files and so on. But post-pandemic, we can reuse it to understand how our corporate buildings are utilized. And also additional feature which comes out of it is utilization of meeting rooms. So it's easy booking and programming which meetings rooms can be used, how often they're used, to have the reports, so to have a better visibility on operational sides of corporate buildings as well.
Well, that's great. And Simon, just to round off this session, a question for you. We've heard a lot about cybersecurity, as you said, and it's, if anything, the importance has been heightened during the pandemic. What is the relationship between cybersecurity strategy and overall brand perception in your view?
So I think, you know, for the longest time, we have this impression that cybersecurity and those sorts of challenges really are focused on, you know, from an IT perspective, like it's the IT department's problem to worry about. But as we look at some of the statistics that Eve went through, we clearly see that, you know, the attackers are getting cleverer. They're using different applications to actually make these vulnerabilities and expose these vulnerabilities. So ultimately, you know, we need to think as well more about how. So when there is an attack, you know, these are really publicized. If we consider, what was it, last year, 2 years ago, when the NHS was attacked, it was front page news for days. If we think about some of the other attacks, you know, Target many years ago had a vulnerability attack, and it cost them millions and millions in damages. But obviously the sort of the brand was impacted the most, you know, the perception of brand. And here, when we talk about banking, I mean, this is personal to people. This is their money. So that comfort and sort of awareness of any kind of cyber risk, any kind of cyber threat attacking a bank would really put customers, nervousness. It really raised their level of nervousness. So obviously perception of the brand should be considered all the way through. So when we're looking at these new applications, going back to what I said previously, selecting the manufacturer, the SI, the consultant, whoever, the thought of cybersecurity isn't just to protect the system, but it's to protect that overall brand perception that the bank has. Does my customer feel safe leaving their money in my care? And again, when we think about physical security, we think about protecting people and property. But as the physical security threat evolves into a cybersecurity threat, well, it's obviously more so now when you can consider some of the impacts that we can have based on again the numbers that you've showed us. So ultimately, brands should be everything when you're creating these kind of application connections and solutions moving forwards.
Great answer, Simon. Now, this is a very important topic and we could continue for much longer, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Can I please invite you to seek out Simon and Eve in the networking lounge using the chat functionality, and also please go and visit the Genetec booth in the exhibition hall. Now, thank you again to my two guests here, Simon Cook from QCIC and Evgenia Ostrovskaya from Genetec.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martin.